Good afternoon. I'm Joe Reingold, and I'm here interviewing Jack Stoller. Today is Monday. What is today? January 6th. Thank you. 2000. It's a new year, 2020. Here we go. Jack, tell me about your family, what you know about your grandparents and your parents.
I know nothing about my grandparents. My parents my mother came from a very small shtetl in Poland, and my father came from the Ukraine down near Odessa. My daddy came to this country about 1905. My mother came over about 1908. They met in 1910 and were married 2 weeks after they met.
Oh, that's great. Where did they meet?
Kansas City, Missouri.
How did they get there?
My father came over. He had a cousin who lived in Philadelphia, and who taught him to be a tailor. And then he and some of his buddies decided they wanted to see the rest of the country, and they took off west. And he went up to Duluth, and it just got so cold there he didn't like it, and he came down to Kansas City and started there. My mother had cousins in Kansas City, and that's why she went there.
Okay.
And my father knew one of the cousins, and he said, "Who was that lady?" And boom, they were married.
Wow. Love at first sight.
Married 69 years.
Oh, wow. Fabulous. Now, did they stay all that time in Kansas City?
No, we lived in Kansas City till they got married in 1910. And in 1936, we moved to Dallas.
What brought them here?
I'm sorry?
What brought them to Dallas?
My father and a friend of his, who was also a tailor, decided they would try the manufacturing business. And they looked around and they liked Dallas, and they decided they would come to Dallas and open up a manufacturing. They manufactured boys' clothes from, I guess, 2 or 3 up to 12.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what they did. They came to Dallas and they started the factory. And unfortunately, the fact between the two of them, they couldn't get along after a few months, and each went their separate ways. And the factory floundered, and that was it.
So what did your dad do?
He bought a tailor shop, and because that's what he knew, and he had a tailor shop. I don't know about money in those days, but he had the shop. He divided it 1/3 and 2/3. The front third was his deal, and the back we lived in the other 2/3. We had no running water. I'm sorry, we had running water. We had no hot water. Had a commode, and that was it. If I had to bathe, I had to go to a friend's house, I had to go to a cousin's house, wherever.
You made do.
That's the way it was.
So you came here, you weren't born here, but you were
No, I
young.
was born in Kansas City, March 28th, 1924. 95 years old.
And you came here when you were 12.
I came here when
Was it a hard adjustment?
I'm sorry?
Was it
no,
difficult?
not really.
No?
Not really. We moved, when we came, my dad had a room on Grand Avenue, and we were there for 2 or 3 weeks. And then we moved in with his friend that he came to Dallas with, and we were there for 2 or 3 weeks. And then we moved to another place. We were a couple of weeks, and that's when he bought the store. Or the shop, I should say. It wasn't the store.
Right. Well, it's okay.
Well, it was a shop, 1507 Pennsylvania.
Ah, okay. How long was he there, that location?
We lived there from 1936 until I went to New York till about 49. And that's when he bought a house on 2822 Forest Avenue.
Mm.
And he bought the house because it had a shop that was built right next to the house, and he could go from the shop directly into the house. And that was his tailor shop. And he lived there until about somewhere in the late 50s, after Shirley and I got married, and he finally retired. And he moved out on Northwest Highway.
Far north.
Far north.
Far north Dallas.
He retired and moved
The
into
red brick apartments.
Yes.
He moved into the apartments in far north, Northwest Highway and Preston Road. And that's where they lived till the day he died.
So tell me a little bit about your childhood here and your schooling here. What was it like in Dallas?
I started out at Colonial Elementary School. I went there for a half a semester. And then from there I went to Forest Avenue High School, which in those days was not predominantly Jewish, but it had a whole lot of Jewish students there, and that's where I grew up. And I graduated from there in May '41. And then in the fall I went to the University of Texas, and while I was at the University of Texas, the war broke out. So I finished up that year, and I came back to Dallas I enlisted, but they didn't call me until May of '43.
Yeah.
And I spent 3 years in service.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Where were you stationed?
Originally I was at Camp Kohler, and then I wound up in Europe. Spent a year and a half in Europe, and 67 days in combat. And that's probably, you're going to ask me a question about something that I'm proud of. Well, one, serving my country was proud. But in Europe, the war was over May the 7th. And about May the 9th, we were stationed in Grimma, Germany. And my unit was given the job of guarding a displaced persons camp. Now, I don't know if you know what a displaced persons camp is, where people from concentration camps and whatnot were brought together before they were repatriated home. And I was on guard duty. And this girl walks up to me and asks me to come into the camp. Now, why she picked me, I do not know. Because the first question she asked me was, do I understand Yiddish? And I said, yes, but I can't come into the camp because I'm on duty. Well, she waited, and when I was relieved, she took me into the camp and brought me into this house, and there were, I don't know how many girls were sitting there. And they sat me down, and they brought me potato soup, which is what they had, and they started asking questions as usual. And when they asked me where I was from, and I said Dallas, Texas, this one girl comes up to me and says, do you know a Rabbi Reebok? I says, I don't know him, but he lives just a few blocks from me. She says, that's my uncle. And I wrote my mother, and a few days later I get this letter from the rabbi. I can't read it because it's in Polish. So I look up, I go back to find the girl. Well, she's gone already. But I find the chaplain, and he finds her, and she comes home to the States before I come home.
Wow.
And she came to Dallas to visit me and spent the day here.
That's beautiful.
So that's a memory I'll never forget.
Small world.
It
Here
is a
you are in
small
Europe
world.
and find somebody who has a relative in
I was
Dallas.
her only living relative.
Wow.
The rest of her family died in the Holocaust.
Oh my God. That's amazing. Beautiful. So after the war, where did you find yourself?
After the war, I came home, and I spent the first couple of months with my sister just to get the Army out of my system. And then I started school at Southern Methodist University. And I was there, I graduated in 3 years. And after that, I went to New York, spent 3 months up there, didn't like it, came back to Dallas, and I went to work in Dallas, and then I went to Kansas City for a wedding, my niece's wedding, and her husband had talked me into going into a business with him up there, and that turned out to be a fiasco. And then my brother came up to Kansas City and asked me if I would be run an office for him. He was a CPA, and I thought my background was in college. He was going to open this office in Wichita Falls, Texas, and he asked me to run it for him. And I said, okay. And it was there that I met my wife.
Mm. Was she from Wichita Falls?
She was originally born in Dallas, but her father was working in Dallas and decided he wanted his own business, and he moved to Wichita Falls and opened it up. And she was 6 when they moved to Wichita Falls.
Okay.
And that's where we met. Had 6 dates.
That was enough, right?
That was all it took.
That's all it took.
I met her the first week of December '52. We were engaged the first week in January of '53 and married in June of '53. I've been married 67 years.
I take it you didn't stay very long in Wichita Falls?
Well, we were there for probably 6 months, 7 months. And my brother decided no, the office wasn't there, and I came to Dallas and worked in the office in Dallas. And then my father-in-law came to Dallas, and he and his associates bought a radio station in Wichita Falls. And he asked me to become the office manager of the radio station up there. So my wife and I decided, okay, and we went back to Wichita Falls, and we lived there for 7 years after that. But I didn't like Wichita Falls. I never did like it. It was a nice city, but the small Jewish community, and I didn't want that for my kids.
Were your children born there?
You know, my son was born in Dallas. Our 2 daughters were born in Wichita Falls. And like I said, it wasn't for me, and my father-in-law moved away, and my wife had nothing there to keep her, so we decided we were going to come back to Dallas.
To the big city.
To the big city.
With lots of Jewish things to do.
Right, right.
So when was that?
1963. In fact, it was the week that Kennedy was assassinated that we moved to Dallas.
Memorable.
That's an interesting story. We were all packed to move on the day Kennedy was assassinated, which was a Friday. Sunday morning, my wife gets very, very sick, and I have to rush her to the hospital. And at 2 o'clock Monday morning, they operated on her. And the truck to move us to Dallas was at my house. And I had to call my in-laws, and they came up and stayed with Charlene in the hospital while I was at the house, loading our furniture into a truck, and the other people were moving into our house. And that night, the next day, I had to come to Dallas to the house that we had bought. And my kids stayed with Well, Cindy stayed with her aunt in Wichita Falls, and my other two stayed with my in-laws in Dallas. I went back to Wichita Falls to spend that Thanksgiving with my wife, and the following Monday she came to Dallas. We've been here ever since.
But she was okay after everything.
Yes.
Oh. Boy, that's a memorable week.
Yes, it was.
Something else.
Joe, I
Unbelievable.
remember it like it was, I remember every detail.
I
And you were
had
7
two-
already? 6, 7?
I stayed with Terry Cooper's parents
Ah,
part of the
right.
time as well.
I had 2 Thanksgiving dinners. I had one with my brother-in-law
Yeah.
and one with a friend of mine.
Well, that's a good one. That's really celebrating. So, you have an interesting take on all of it because you've been up and back a number of times, different
Yes.
cities, but always back to Dallas. So, how have you seen the changes in this city, and what have you
This city
seen?
has changed tremendously. When I moved to Dallas in 1936, it was a city of approximately 200,000, maybe a shade more. Had a huge Jewish community and we called it South Dallas. I don't know if that's the
Yeah, it is.
correct. It is. But there were Grand Avenue, Park Row, South Boulevard, and Forest Avenue, where the bulk of them lived. There were a few that lived south of there. There were a few Jewish people that lived in North Dallas and East Dallas. But that was the predominant. We had just 3, 4 schools down there. We had Temple Emmanuel, Sheretz Israel, Agudas Achim, Tifereth Israel. They were all right together, and we were just, it was nice being there.
Did your family belong to any of them?
No, unfortunately, for whatever reason, I never have understood it. They grew up in Europe, and when you grew up in Europe, in those early days, there was a tradition, and you followed the tradition of being Jewish, and they followed the holidays. They weren't kosher, but they were very steeply involved in their religion. But when they came to the United States, for whatever reason, they just didn't belong to a show. Maybe it was freedom, I don't know. I have no idea. We did not belong to a show, but they observed the holidays. And my mother she couldn't read English. But she could read Yiddish, Hebrew. My father could daven with the best of them. And we did recognize all the holidays. That they did, but they didn't go to
That's okay.
I was never bar mitzvah. They just didn't believe in it. I can't answer the why.
Yeah, that's all right. What are your contacts in the Jewish community, or what have you been involved in lately?
Oh, my wife and I have belonged to 2 or 3 shuls, synagogues. 4. But I do not deny I'm Jewish. I will fight to the end. I'm not religious to that extent. But that's the way of the world today. The assimilation, it's hard for me to describe that. Everybody has their own beliefs. We are Jewish. I don't deny it. I will follow all the rules, regulations, holidays, whatever you want to call it. But the idea of going to the services, I never did like them. I never did understand Hebrew. To me, it was more of just the community getting together, the tradition of 100, 1,000, or whatever you want to call it, years ago, is kind of falling apart. It's down deep in their hearts, but they don't meat like they used to.
Had you been involved in any civic organizations in the community?
No, I never have.
No.
Never have.
That's okay.
And I think that comes because my parents never were involved. They just weren't. In fact, I was never involved. I don't take that back. But the only organization I was ever involved in was a social deal when I came home from service. And it was just made up of guys who were in service, all Jewish guys. We called it ourselves the DSD, Dallas Stars of David.
Oh.
And we all palled around together, and that's where the guys were starting to get married. And that was the only organization I was really in. But it was mostly a social deal.
I want to back up for just a minute because I had a thought. I forgot to ask you. Did you experience any type of anti-Semitism in the service?
Oh, yes.
You did?
Oh,
What was that
yes.
like? What happened?
I guess, anti-Semitism, I remember that as a child when I was in Kansas City, the Gerald L.K. steals and the KKKs. I was on the edges, but I saw it, and I do remember it. But in service, the one thing that stands out to me is that, oh yeah, there was always a little bit of anti-Semitism, but the biggest one, I was in England. I can give you the exact date if you want it.
Okay.
It was December the 15th, 1944. The only reason I remember that date, that was the day Glenn Miller disappeared. But we were in England, and I was going to breakfast, and there was a radio playing, as we always had. But I didn't like the music, and I just went up and changed it to something I liked. And after I did that, this one soldier called me a very bad name. And it really upset me because he used the word Jew in it. And I grabbed him and I took him outside. I says, "You're bigger than I am. And you can probably beat me to a pulp. But before you do, I want you to understand, I don't know what religion you are, but I respect that. And I expect you to respect my religion. You can call me any name in the world, but don't ever call me what you did." And the guy looked at me and he says, "You know, you're right." And he and I became friends after that.
That's a success story.
But that did happen.
Yeah. Wonderful. Okay.
But there was anti-Semitism. I've seen anti-Semitism from the day I was born.
Okay, so now tell us where your family is, your children and your grandchildren, and what they're doing.
Well, I'm very fortunate. I have 3 unbelievable kids. All 3 live here in Dallas with me. But it's like everything else. Each one has their own family, and each one has to assimilate with their family. And their mother and I, we're here. They don't forget us. They take care of us. And I understand their individual families come first. And I have to respect that, because that's the way I would be.
But you get together.
We're together constantly.
Oh, okay.
Fortunately, I have one daughter who believes like I do that family is everything. And gosh, for 40 years that I know of, we're together every year for holidays. She makes sure of that.
Wonderful. That's wonderful.
Cindy.
You're lucky you have your family around.
I am.
Yeah. How many grandkids do you have?
I've got 5 beautiful grandkids. I've got 3 great-grandchildren and
Oh.
another one that's due in April.
Oh, mazel tov. That's special.
That is special.
That's really
That is
special.
special.
Okay. So now I'm going to ask you a serious question. Think about this for a moment. Is there anybody that you can think of who might have been your role model through the years?
Through the years, my role model, well, that's a hard question because I've come across several people that like I wouldn't call my father a role model, but he was a very wise man in his way. I guess the closest I could come to a role model would be my father-in-law, because he was a family man. I used to call him the general. I did, because he was a kind of matriarch for his 5 sister-in-laws and their families. And we all kind of fell in line with it, because in his way he was a good guy. He was a great leader. Let me put it that way.
Okay, that's wonderful. Can you think of something that you are the most proud of or really, really proud of in your life?
Well, like I said, that deal with the girl, but the most proud of is, I'm sorry, I just have
It's
to
okay.
say my family. I have to
That's all
say
right.
my family, because, that's the one thing I felt about, was when we get together, I just want to sit there and look. That's all I want to do, is sit there and look at the table, and I'm contented. How fortunate, extremely fortunate that I have been in my life. I lived through the 20s. I grew up during the Depression. I went through the war and did not get a scratch. And you have no idea how that is. And I've got such a wonderful wife who's given me great children. So what else can a man ask for?
Nothing.
And I've
That's
had a
fantastic.
long life.
Yes, yes, indeed. So, just to wrap up, is there anything that you would like to add that we haven't covered or that you'd like to share?
I don't know what it would be. I mean, it's hard.
What hobbies do you have?
Huh?
Or did you have? I didn't ask about that. Any hobbies or interests that you'd like to pursue or that you had
Hobbies?
pursued? Mm-hmm.
Oh, there's a lot of hobby and a lot of things I like to do. I like to travel. Unfortunately,
Yeah.
age doesn't do that anymore. I like sports. I just like to be with my family. I just like to sit down and talk with them. If I could talk with them one-on-one, I would love it. But that's a very difficult thing to do. Very difficult thing to do. The one thing that I am very unhappy about is that I have 3 kids. Oh, they know a lot about me, but they have never sat down with me, ever, and really wanted to know about me from the day I was born to today. They got things here, things there, a spattering, I'll put it that way.
Well, now they have some more. They'll be able to look at this.
They'll have some more, okay?
Yeah.
What else?
That's good. That's a wrap. Unless there's anything else you'd like to add.
Oh, I could add a lot of things.
well. You can.
I'm not here. I mean,
Well, add.
What? What do you want me to add?
Well, tell her about your running buddies, all the people that, that you're still friends with today.
Oh,
How
well,
many people do you know that are friends today with
They
people
have-
they went to high school with?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, like I told you, I got people in this building I graduated high school with, and we're still friends.
Did they have you had reunions periodically with everybody?
With them, I don't have. We go out with them
Oh, okay.
periodically,
Yeah, high school reunions.
Just and I still call one of them my sweetheart. But you know, after all, I met her back in 1937. But at that day, when I met her, she was already in love with the man she married. But you know, I guess I've had an interesting life. I'll put it that way, because I've done a lot of weird, wild things. I was wild when I was young, extremely wild. My wife doesn't know about all the things. My kids don't know about all the things that I did when I was young. So.
Do you want to capture any of them on
No.
this film?
No.
That's a
I know
no.
most of it.
No, you don't.
Yeah.
You
I know
know,
a lot
probably
A little bit.
a little bit. But I did. There are things I did. It's a wonder I'm not in jail for. I'm serious.
I believe you.
I can remember. You talk about the Depression. And nobody had any money, and I was a kid in Kansas City, and there was a park there called Swope Park. And it was a little section of the park. It was the third largest park in the United States at that time.
Wow.
But that was back in the days before air conditioning, and I'm going back in the early 30s now. And it was a section that they called Little Israel. Because when you went there nothing but Jews out there. And why did they come there? It was the summertime, and it was hot. And at night, that's what we did. We all went out there. The families went out there. The women would sit under the park lights and play cards. The men would play cards. And us kids would run and get into mischief. Well, nobody had any money. And there was a concession stand there. If you wanted something, Daddy, give me a dime, give me a nickel. Don't have it. So the concession stand, in those days, all the soft drinks came in bottles. There were no cans. But he would give us 2 cents for every bottle we brought back, because people, you know. Well, one day, 3 or 4 of us, we jumped the fence for the concession stand, and all the bottles he had in the back, we were throwing back over the fence. And we took him around to the front and sold them back to him for 2 cents a piece. And we would buy popcorn and popsicles.
That was very ingenious of you, actually. Maybe illegal, but ingenious. Oh boy. Listen.
Or, I don't know if
You
you
had
like
seichel. You had smarts.
I don't know if you like a story like that.
That's a great story. I
Or
love
the-
it.
or the
Maybe
other-
you shouldn't be telling it, but that's a great story.
Another story is, back in those days, the theaters. They were the only things that were air conditioned. But to get people to come, because they had nobody had any money, they would devise programs. So like one theater had a deal where on a Saturday, if you were a child, you come, and they would have games. Like I know one day I went to the theater and I had to hop across the stage eating crackers. And I had to go all the way across with no water. Well, I tried, I didn't care for that. Or they would give away script. For people walk in, they would give script. And once a month, you could take the script and buy products. Well, a lot of people didn't care for the scripts. And my buddy and one of my buddies and I, we would sit by the theater every night, and as the people came out, can I have your money? We gathered a whole lot of money, and when they had the sale for this, we'd go there, we'd buy a box of fudgesicles, a box of chocolate-covered raisins.
That's very smart.
But that was my young life.
Okay.
I was a paper boy through the Dallas Morning News. In fact, I had a route in South Dallas on South Boulevard in my senior year. And on my route was my wife's grandfather. I threw him the paper.
Yeah.
Grandfather, he lived on,
South Boulevard,
South
2620 South Boulevard. That was on my, he was one of my customers.
How much did that pay in those days?
In
paper
those
route.
days,
Yeah.
the way the routes work, you'd have a route that would have approximately 50 papers, 45 to 55. Anyway, the paper was 20 cents a week. And so you got 7 cents of that. So if you had 50 papers, you would make $3.50 a week. If you collected from everybody. Not everybody paid every week. You know, and that was a constant thing. You'd be lucky if you wound up with $2 or $2.50 a week. But that was my spending money.
was my grandfather pay, did he pay?
Well, I was fortunate. That particular route was on South Boulevard, and it went from Oakland Avenue to the railroad tracks. I never had to collect because everybody there paid by the year. They would send a check into the. I never had to collect on that route. That was the only route I had that way. But very few people paid by the month, by the year, because nobody had any money. You know, in the Depression, we were lucky if we could rub 2 nickels together.
Were a lot of the businesses still on, like Main Street in that area, Elm, the Jewish businesses, I mean, where they
Yes.
once were in South Dallas, or in downtown Dallas?
In downtown Dallas, well, when I was first moved here, downtown Dallas, you would start up on Harwood with Teich Gettinger, and you come down to Neiman's, and you go to A. Harris and Company, and then Sanger Brothers was at the far end. And in between were a lot of small Jewish businesses. They're all gone now. The Leader Store is gone. Morris Menswear is gone. Lynn's Brothers is gone. You know, I remember all those stores. I don't know. There was probably a bunch of others in there that I don't remember.
The reason I asked was because in a book that I refer to a lot, it says that there were so many Jewish businesses that everything was closed during the High Holy Days.
Exactly.
Even if you weren't Jewish, the stores were all closed.
And
they knew that it was the holiday.
I mean, you could
Yeah,
go downtown on Rosh Hashanah.
Right. And Yom
everything would be
Kippur.
closed.
Yeah.
You know, because
Right.
everybody was in shul.
That's right.
One of them was the Weiner shop, that was my grandfather.
Her grandfather was a Weiner shop.
Yeah.
They were next door to A. Harris and Company. And A. Harris and Company, of course, merged with the Sanger Brothers.
Right.
Then they sold out to someplace in Felines in Houston. I don't know what that. Teich Gettinger finally closed. Neiman's is the only store that's still downtown. It's the only one.
Yeah. Things have changed a lot.
And when it was amazing, for me anyway, to go downtown and to walk into Neiman's is like walking into the Taj Mahal or something, you know.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
like I said, we couldn't rub 2 nickels together.
Yeah.
And I don't know if anybody else told you about the White Theater.
White?
The White Theater in South Dallas.
No, I don't think so.
On Saturday afternoon, the White Theater in South Dallas, it was on Forest and Oakland. And it cost you a dime. All the Jewish kids would go there. You go in at 1 o'clock and you'd come out at 6. But you could go in there. Everybody you knew was from South Dallas was in the theater.
It's a good gathering. That's fun.
That's exactly what it
That's
was, the gathering.
I used to go with Marilyn Sweet.
At that time her name was Marilyn Rudy.
Yeah, right, Marilyn Rudy.
But no, that was, South Dallas was very, very unique back in the 30s and the 40s.
When did you move further north?
Oh, I didn't move further north until we got married. Like I said, my parents moved on to Forest Avenue, and then I left, I was there when I went to SMU, but when we moved to Dallas, the first house we bought was in Mesquite.
Oh, okay.
And then we went back to Wichita Falls, and then when we moved back to Dallas, we moved into the Melshire Estates, which is up on Forest and Melidio.
Far north Dallas.
Far north
Far
Dallas.
north
In fact, it was so far north, I thought I was in Oklahoma.
Well, you were a real trooper because everybody seemed to follow you, you know.
Well, no, they were here.
Okay.
I followed them.
You followed them.
Yeah, my brother, when the first time, his first house in North Dallas was on Joyce Way. And we lived on Forest Avenue in South Dallas. I thought that, my gosh, to drive all the way out there, you know.
You had to pack a lunch.
Exactly.
So far.
I remember I was taking my mother in 1950. I just bought a brand new 1950 Dodge. And I was taking my mother and dad to my brother's house. And we were driving out, and I stopped for a light, and I heard the screech of tires, and I held my breath, and this man backed right into the back of the car. My brand new car.
Oh, God. And they probably didn't have the same kind of
He
car
didn't have any
insurance that we
insurance,
had. No,
naturally.
right, of course. Oh, God.
I'll never forget that.
Wow. Well, you were forward thinking by moving there to Melshire Estates.
Yeah,
That was the way to go.
it was really nice there, it really
Yeah,
was.
yeah.
Oh, my brother, yeah, he looked at that house for a year before he bought it. He bought that house, he paid, I think, about $23,000 or $4,000. And the last I saw it sold for something like $400,000, but that's what's happened to Dallas.
Right.
How much was our house on, what you call it, where we were?
Melidio, oh, I paid $30,000 for that, and we sold it for $300,000. And it's a shame, an absolute shame, to drive up and down South Boulevard and Park Road today to see what has happened to those houses that all the Jewish people lived in that were so immaculate, so beautiful. The yards, the street. But
Yeah,
that is attrition.
that's progress.
Well, you call it progress, I call it
It's
attrition.
not progress. Okay, so that's it. Are we done?
As far as I'm concerned, I could go on for hours, but I'm not going.
You can. I can't, but you can. No, thank you, Jack. It's been a pleasure.
My pleasure.
Thank
My
you
pleasure.
so much.